The sun cast a golden glow over the peaceful African village of Nyabaira, where the air was filled with the scent of fresh earth and the rhythmic songs of birds. Life in the village was simple but rich in tradition. Elders gathered under the great baobab tree to share stories, and children ran barefoot across the dusty paths, their laughter echoing through the fields. The villagers lived in harmony, bound by the customs of their ancestors. Among them was Zuri, a girl as radiant as the morning sun. She was known for her kindness, her gentle hands always ready to help the elderly and her heart open to those in need. With a voice as soothing as a flowing stream, she sang as she worked, weaving baskets and fetching water from the river. Her beauty was not just in her appearance but in the warmth of her soul, and for this the villagers adored her. But not everyone was pleased with her grace. Zuri's stepmother, Nia, carried a heart darkened by jealousy. Once a celebrated beauty, she had watched with growing bitterness as the villagers' affection shifted toward Zuri. Each smile directed at the girl, each word of praise felt like a thorn in her side. The envy festered within her, twisting into cruelty. She made Zuri's life unbearable, giving her the hardest chores, denying her food, and blaming her for things she had not done. While others rested after a long day's work, Zuri scrubbed the floors and washed heavy bundles of clothes by the river. While others ate hearty meals, she was left with scraps. Despite the harsh treatment, Zuri never lost her spirit. She bore the burden without complaint, knowing that kindness was her greatest strength. Yet, deep inside, she wondered why fate had given her a heart so full of love but a life so filled with pain. The village remained unaware of Zuri's suffering, for she never spoke a word against her stepmother. But fate, unyielding and just, had a way of revealing the truth. Days turned into weeks, and the weight of Zuri's suffering grew heavier. Yet, she remained steadfast, never letting cruelty dull the warmth of her heart. But her stepmother, Nia, had grown tired of watching Zuri endure. She longed to rid herself of the girl entirely, to erase her presence from the village like a whisper lost in the wind. One evening, as the village settled into the calm embrace of twilight, Nia stood over a simmering pot, her hands moving with deceptive grace. Hidden within the folds of her dress was a pouch of sleeping herbs, gathered in secret from the outskirts of the village. These herbs were no ordinary remedy for restlessness. They possessed a power so deep that even the strongest would not wake until the earth had turned beneath the sky. With careful fingers she sprinkled the fine powder into Zuri's meal, stirring until it dissolved into nothingness. A sinister smile curled on her lips as she carried the food to the girl, masking her malice with false concern. "You have worked hard today, child," Nia said, her voice unusually soft. "Eat well and rest." Zuri, weary from a long day's labor, accepted the food without hesitation. The aroma was comforting, and despite the bitterness in her stepmother's eyes, she wanted to believe in the small kindness. She took bite after bite, unaware of the treachery hidden within. Not long after, a strange heaviness settled over her limbs. The world around her seemed to blur, the distant voices of the villagers fading into nothing but a dull hum. She blinked, trying to shake off the drowsiness creeping into her bones, but it was relentless. A strange fear prickled at the edge of her consciousness, yet she had no strength to fight it. By the time night had swallowed the village in darkness, Zuri lay in a deep, unnatural sleep. Her breath was steady, her body unmoving, as though the weight of 1,000 dreams held her captive. The stepmother watched with satisfaction, her heart beating with wicked anticipation. Slipping into the shadows, Nia signaled to 2 men she had bribed with promises of gold and land. Their faces were hidden beneath hoods, their movements swift and silent. Without hesitation, they lifted Zuri's limp body, careful not to wake even the smallest of creatures as they carried her away. Through winding paths and dense forests, they moved under the cover of night, their footsteps swallowed by the whispering wind. The village slept in peaceful ignorance, unaware that one of their own was being stolen from them. And as the first hints of dawn painted the sky, Zuri was gone, vanished from the only home she had ever known. Zuri's mind drifted in a fog of restless dreams, shadows swirling behind her closed eyelids. She felt weightless, as if floating between the world of the living and the unseen realm beyond. Time itself seemed to stretch and twist, her thoughts slipping away like grains of sand between her fingers. Then, suddenly, a sharp gasp tore from her lips as her eyes fluttered open. She was staring at a ceiling made of dried palm leaves, the scent of burning herbs thick in the air. A soft glow from a flickering lantern cast strange shadows along the mud-brick walls. Her heart pounded in her chest as she struggled to sit up, her limbs weak and heavy. Where was she? This was not her home, not the familiar warmth of the village she had always known. Panic surged through her as she forced her legs to move, but even the simple act of shifting her weight sent a wave of dizziness through her body. She clutched the woven mat beneath her, breathing heavily as the room spun around her. "Rest, child," a gentle voice called from the doorway. Zuri turned sharply, her eyes widening at the sight of a woman standing before her. She was draped in flowing robes of deep indigo, her dark skin illuminated by the dim lantern light. Strands of silver wove through her thick braids, and her eyes, warm yet unreadable, held the weight of untold stories. "Where am I?" Zuri's voice was barely above a whisper, hoarse and uncertain. "Who are you?" The woman stepped closer, kneeling beside her with a bowl in hand. The steam from the herbal mixture within rose between them, carrying an earthy aroma. "You are safe," she said simply, offering the bowl. "Drink this. It will help." Zuri hesitated. She had trusted too easily before, eaten food without question, and had woken up in this strange place. Her fingers curled into her palms, her heart hammering in her chest. "Please," she pressed, her voice trembling. "Tell me where I am." The woman sighed, placing the bowl beside her. "You are far from the place you call home," she said at last, her tone calm but firm. "That is all you need to know for now." Zuri's breath hitched. Far from home? How could that be? The last thing she remembered was feeling unbearably sleepy, her body giving in to exhaustion. And now she was here wherever here was. Tears stung her eyes, but she blinked them away. She would not break. She had endured cruelty, loneliness, and hardship. She would endure this too. "I have to go back," she said, pushing herself upright despite the way her body protested. "My village, my people, they will be looking for me." The woman shook her head, her expression unreadable. "No one is looking for you, child," she said softly. "Not yet." Zuri's stomach twisted. How could that be true? Had her stepmother lied to the villagers, told them she had run away? Did they think she had abandoned them? The thought sent a fresh wave of anguish through her. She clenched her fists. "Then I'll find my own way back." The woman sighed again, this time with a sadness that Zuri couldn't understand. "You must not leave," she warned. "Not yet." A chill crept down Zuri's spine. There was something in the woman's voice, something unspoken, something that made her feel as though unseen eyes were watching, waiting. She swallowed hard, her heart pounding louder than before. "Why?" she asked. The woman looked at her for a long moment, her gaze filled with something that looked like sorrow. "Because you are not ready to face what awaits you outside these walls." Days passed in a blur, each moment filled with quiet uncertainty. Zuri remained within the strange house, observing the people who moved about its vast corridors. The house was unlike anything she had ever seen, grand yet eerie in its silence. The walls were adorned with woven tapestries depicting ancient battles and forgotten legends, and the scent of rare incense lingered in the air, curling through the dimly lit halls like an unseen specter. Though the woman who had first tended to her remained kind, she offered no clear answers to Zuri's growing questions. The other servants, too, spoke in hushed voices whenever she was near, their eyes flickering toward her with something between curiosity and fear. One evening, as she wandered through the courtyard, she overheard two maids whispering near a well. "She doesn't know yet," one murmured. "She will soon," the other replied. "And when she does." Their voices faded as they noticed her approach. The tension in the air was unmistakable. Zuri's mind raced with possibilities. Who was she to these people? Why did they speak of her as if she were more than just a lost girl? Restless and frustrated, she found herself retreating to her small chamber. As she sat on the edge of the bed, rubbing her hands together in thought, something caught her eye. A faint shimmer along her skin. She gasped. Her wrist bore strange markings, delicate yet intricate, glowing faintly beneath the moonlight filtering through the window. They had not been there before. At least, not that she had ever noticed. Her breath quickened as she traced the lines with her fingertips. The markings pulsed for a moment before fading as if they were alive. Terror and wonder warred within her. What was happening to her? Before she could make sense of it, the door creaked open. Zuri jumped to her feet as a tall figure entered the room. He moved with an air of quiet authority, his dark robes embroidered with gold, his presence commanding even in the dim light. His face was partially concealed by a deep hood, but his eyes, piercing and knowing, held her captive. For a long moment he simply studied her. Then, in a voice both rich and unsettling, he spoke. "You are awake at last." Zuri's pulse pounded in her ears. "Who are you?" she demanded. "Why am I here?" The nobleman tilted his head slightly as if considering how much to reveal. "You are here because fate willed it so," he said, Because you were never meant to be where you came from. Her breath caught. That's not true. My village is my home. He stepped closer, his gaze never leaving hers. Is it? A cold sensation crawled up her spine. There was something in his tone, something that suggested he knew more about her than she did herself. Look at your wrist, he commanded. Zuri hesitated before slowly lifting her arm. The markings reappeared, glowing faintly once more. The nobleman nodded. That, he said, is the proof that you are not ordinary. That you are not just a village girl. Her knees felt weak, but she forced herself to stand firm. Then what am I? The nobleman's lips curved into the faintest hint of a smile. The rightful heir to a power that was stolen long ago. Zuri's heart pounded in her chest, each beat echoing like a drum inside her head. The nobleman's words hung in the air, heavy with meaning, impossible to ignore. The rightful heir to a power that was stolen long ago. Her fingers trembled as she looked down at the strange markings on her wrist, glowing softly as if they carried a secret of their own. She clenched her fist, willing them to disappear. This had to be a mistake. No, she whispered, shaking her head. You're wrong. I don't have any power. I don't know what this means. The nobleman's gaze remained steady, calm yet unreadable. You were never meant to remain in that village, Zuri. You were hidden away as a child, kept from your true path. The marks on your wrist prove that destiny has now come for you. Zuri took a step back, fear and confusion tangling in her chest. Who are you? Why are you telling me this? The nobleman sighed, his expression softening just slightly. I am Lord Otto, protector of the ancient bloodline. I have searched for years, following whispers of a child born with the mark of the forgotten. Many thought you were lost forever, but fate led you to me. Zuri shook her head again, her mind reeling. No. My home is Nigerian. My family. Lord Otto's sharp gaze silenced her. Your family? The woman who mistreated you? The people who never questioned your suffering? His voice was not cruel, but it cut through her like a blade. Did they ever truly protect you? A lump formed in her throat. She wanted to deny it, to insist that her village had been her home, that she belonged there. But the truth clung to her like a shadow. The stepmother who tormented her, the villagers who had failed to see her pain. Had they ever really been her family? I don't understand, she whispered. Why now? Why take me away in the middle of the night? Lord Otto's expression darkened. Because you were in danger. Forces greater than you can imagine are seeking you even now. Had you remained in that village, you would have perished before ever knowing the truth. A chill ran down her spine. She didn't know what terrified her more, the idea that there were people hunting her, or that her entire life had been built on a lie. Lord Otto stepped forward, his presence both commanding and reassuring. You do not have to fear, Zuri. You are under my protection now. No harm will come to you as long as you remain here. But that was the problem. She didn't want to remain here. No matter what he said, no matter how much doubt gnawed at her heart, she still longed for home. She longed for the village, for the sound of the river, for the life she had known. Even if it had been difficult, even if it had been painful, it had been hers. I want to go back, she said, her voice firm despite the uncertainty in her heart. Lord Otto studied her, his face betraying no emotion. You are free to leave, Zuri. But if you walk out of here now, you may not survive long enough to reach your village. A wave of unease rolled through her. What? Who's after me? His eyes darkened. There are those who fear what you might become. If they find you before you are ready, they will destroy you. Zuri swallowed hard, her pulse quickening. She had spent her life fighting against cruelty, against pain, against loneliness. But this was different. This was a battle she hadn't even known she was part of. She was trapped between two lives, one she longed for and one she never asked for. And she didn't know which one to choose. The weight of Lord Otto's words pressed heavily on Zuri's chest, filling her with a mixture of fear, disbelief, and reluctant curiosity. She couldn't simply accept that her life had been a lie, but she couldn't ignore the strange feeling in her heart, the quiet whisper that told her there was truth hidden in his words. And so she began to listen. For the next few days, Lord Otto allowed her to explore the estate freely. Though he remained reserved, he did not stop her from asking questions. The servants, however, were less forthcoming. Their eyes flickered with hesitation whenever she approached, their words cautious. She doesn't remember, Zuri overheard one of the older women whisper one evening. She doesn't know who she is. Another voice, younger, responded. Perhaps it is better that way. The past is full of pain. The past. Something in her gut told her that the answer she sought lay in the past, her past. One afternoon she wandered through the eastern wing of the house, a part she had not yet explored. The walls here were adorned with portraits, each one of a noble figure from generations past. There were strong warriors, wise elders, and regal women draped in fine fabrics. Then, just as she was about to turn away, her eyes landed on a painting that made her breath catch in her throat. A woman with deep brown skin, dark piercing eyes, and a striking resemblance to Zuri stared back at her from the canvas. She wore a flowing red and gold garment, her hands folded in quiet strength. But it was not just her face that sent a shiver down Zuri's spine. It was the markings on her wrist, the same markings that had appeared on Zuri's own skin. Her heart pounded. "Who is she?" she whispered. A voice answered behind her. "Your mother." Zuri turned sharply to see Lord Otto standing a few feet away, his expression solemn. She struggled to find her voice. "No, that's not possible. My mother." "She was not the woman you grew up believing she was," Lord Otto interrupted gently. "This woman, her name was Naima. She was once the rightful heir to this house." Zuri's pulse roared in her ears. "What happened to her?" Lord Otto's gaze darkened. "She was betrayed." The words sliced through the air like a blade. Zuri felt her legs grow weak, but she steadied herself. "By who?" Lord Otto hesitated for a brief moment before answering. "By the woman who raised you as her own." Zuri's world tilted. "My stepmother?" Lord Otto nodded. "Nia was once a servant in this very household, but her ambitions knew no limits. She envied your mother's place, resented the power she held. So she conspired against her, spreading lies, turning people against her. In the end, Naima was forced into exile." Zuri clenched her fists, her nails digging into her palms. She had always known Nia was cruel, but this was something far worse. "And me?" Her voice trembled. "What did she do to me?" Lord Otto's expression was grim. "She knew who you were. She took you as an infant, erased your identity, and raised you in the village, ensuring you would never discover the truth." The room spun around Zuri. All her life, she had endured Nia's cruelty, never knowing the depths of her deception. She had been stolen, hidden away, raised in suffering, all to keep her from reclaiming what was hers. A sharp, burning rage ignited in her chest. "She wanted to get rid of me," Zuri whispered, her voice barely containing the fury building inside her. "That's why she drugged me. That's why she sent me away in the middle of the night." Lord Otto nodded. "She must have learned that the markings had appeared on your wrist. It meant that your bloodline had awakened, that you could no longer be hidden. She knew that once others discovered the truth, you would reclaim your place, and she could not allow that to happen." Zuri's hands trembled, but this time, it was not with fear. It was with resolve. For years, she had endured her stepmother's cruelty, believing it was merely the fate she had been dealt. Now she knew the truth. Now she understood what had been taken from her. And she was not going to let it continue. She lifted her chin, looking Lord Otto directly in the eyes. "Then it's time I stop running." His gaze held hers, a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes. "And what do you intend to do?" She exhaled slowly. "I will go back. I will face her. And I will take back the life that was stolen from me." For the first time since she had arrived, Lord Otto smiled. It was not a smile of amusement or kindness, it was a smile of approval. "Good," he said. "Then let us prepare." Zuri turned back to the portrait of her mother, her heart steady and certain. She was no longer a lost girl. She was the daughter of Naima. And she was ready to reclaim her destiny. The wind howled through the trees as Zuri tightened the cloak around her shoulders. The night sky stretched endlessly above her, stars shimmering like distant whispers of fate. Lord Otto stood beside her, his tall figure motionless as he gazed at the road ahead. "Are you certain about this?" he asked, his voice calm but laced with warning. Zuri met his gaze with steady determination. "I am." Otto nodded, his expression unreadable. "Then we leave at dawn." The journey back to Nayabira would not be easy. The path was long, the dangers many. But Zuri knew she could not turn back now. She had lived in the shadows of lies for too long. Now she was ready to claim the truth. The first challenge. By sunrise, Zuri and her small traveling party set off. Otto had insisted on sending a few guards with her, warriors sworn to protect the noble bloodline. She did not argue. While she felt a fire burning within her, she knew she was not invincible. The journey took them through dense forests, across open plains, and through treacherous mountain passes. But the true danger did not come from nature, it came from those who hunted her. On the third night, as they made camp near a quiet stream, an eerie silence settled over them. The fire crackled softly, but the air felt wrong, too still, too expectant. Then, without warning, shadows moved in the trees. A cry rang out as one of the guards fell, struck by an arrow. Chaos erupted as masked figures emerged from the darkness, swords gleaming under the moonlight. Assassins. Zuri's breath hitched as she stumbled back, her heart racing. The warriors with her fought fiercely, their blades clashing against the enemy, but the ambush had been well planned. One of the attackers lunged at her. She barely had time to react before a powerful force surged within her. A blinding light pulsed from her wrist. The man screamed as he was flung backward, his body crashing into a tree with unnatural force. Zuri gasped, staring at her own hands. The markings on her wrist glowed fiercely, radiating energy she had never felt before. The battle ended as quickly as it had begun. The remaining assassins fled into the night, leaving behind only the wounded and the dead. One of the warriors, a woman named Kato, knelt beside Zuri. "They knew you were coming," she said gravely. "Your enemies will not stop." Zuri swallowed hard. She had known the journey would be dangerous, but now she truly understood what she was up against. And yet, something inside her had awakened. She was no longer powerless. New allies, new lessons. The next leg of the journey brought unexpected encounters. As they passed through a small village nestled in the hills, they met an elder named Babu Tano, a seer who had once served the noble house. He studied Zuri for a long time before speaking. "You have your mother's eyes," he said, his voice heavy with memory. Zuri sat across from him in his small hut, the air thick with the scent of burning herbs. "You knew her?" she asked. Tano nodded. "She was fierce like you. But she trusted too easily. That was her downfall." Zuri leaned in. "Tell me what I need to know." Tano chuckled. "Impatient. Good. You will need that fire." He gestured to her wrist. "Your markings, do you feel them calling?" Zuri hesitated before nodding. "Yes. They did something during a fight." Tano's expression grew serious. "That is your birthright. A power passed down through your mother's line. It is waking now because you are stepping into your destiny." Zuri exhaled slowly. She had spent her whole life feeling powerless. But now she was beginning to understand she had never been powerless at all. Before they left, Tano pressed a small talisman into her palm. "This will guide you when you are lost," he said. "But remember, strength alone is not enough. You must be wise or you will fall as she did." Zuri bowed her head in thanks. She would not make the same mistakes. The return to Nayabira. The final stretch of the journey was the hardest. As they neared Nayabira, memories flooded Zuri's mind. The village streets, the laughter of children, the river where she had once washed clothes. But more than anything she remembered the pain. The cruel hands of her stepmother. The loneliness. Now she was returning. But not as the helpless girl they had cast aside. As the sun dipped behind the horizon, the village came into view. Smoke curled from the huts and the distant sound of drums echoed through the air. Looked the same. And yet, everything had changed. Zuri took a deep breath. "It's time," she said. Her journey was not over. The real battle was just beginning. A hushed silence fell over the village as Zuri stepped into the main square, her presence commanding attention. Faces turned, eyes widening in disbelief. Some whispered her name in shock. Others simply stared as if seeing a ghost. No one had expected her to return. She stood tall, her chin lifted, her eyes scanning the crowd. The air was thick with tension. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Then, from the far end of the square, a familiar figure emerged. Nia. Zuri's stepmother. The woman's eyes widened for a fraction of a second before she schooled her features into an expression of forced calm. She stepped forward, her mouth already twisting into a lie. "Zuri, my child," she exclaimed, placing a hand over her chest. "You have returned to us. We feared the worst. What happened to you?" Zuri didn't flinch. She didn't blink. She saw the flicker of nervousness in Nia's eyes, the way her fingers clenched against the fabric of her robe. She was stalling, searching for a way to twist the story in her favor. But this time, Zuri would not let her. She took a slow step forward, her voice steady. "Stop lying." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Nia blinked. "Zuri, I don't understand." "I know what you did," Zuri cut in, her voice sharp. "You stole me from my real mother. You hid me away so I would never learn the truth. And when you realized that truth was coming for me, you tried to get rid of me." Murmurs spread through the gathered villagers like wildfire. They glanced at one another, uncertainty flickering in their eyes. Nia let out a forced laugh, shaking her head. "Listen to yourself. Who has been filling your mind with such nonsense?" "You did." Zuri lifted her wrist, revealing the glowing markings. You always knew who I was. And you feared me. Nia's expression faltered for the briefest moment. Zuri seized the moment. This village has seen your cruelty, Nia, she said, her voice growing stronger. For years they watched as you mistreated me, forced me to work while you lived in comfort. They saw the bruises, the hunger, the exhaustion. Her eyes swept over the crowd. You all saw it. And you did nothing. A few villagers lowered their heads in shame. Zuri's voice did not waver. But I was just a girl then. I was helpless. Not anymore. Nia's eyes darted toward the village elders, who stood solemnly near the gathering crowd. Realizing that her usual manipulations would not work this time, she dropped the act. Her expression hardened. And what do you expect to do now? She hissed. Do you think you can simply walk in here and take back a life that was never meant for you? Zuri took another step forward, her gaze unwavering. No, Nia. I don't need to take it back. She let the glow of her markings intensify. It was always mine. A voice rang out from the crowd. Is this true? It was Elder Django, the oldest and wisest member of the village council. He stepped forward, his sharp eyes locking onto Nia. Have you deceived us all these years? Nia hesitated. For the first time, true panic flickered across her face. I did what I had to do, she snapped, her voice laced with desperation. I raised her. I fed her. You tormented her, Elder Django interrupted. And now we know why. The elders exchanged looks, their expressions grave. The villagers watched in tense anticipation. Elder Django turned to Zuri. Tell us everything. Zuri took a deep breath and told them the truth. She spoke of her real mother, Naima, the noble woman who had been betrayed. She told them about the stepmother's lies, about how Nia had stolen her as a child and kept her hidden from her true destiny. She spoke of the night she had been drugged, left for dead. By the time she finished, a thick silence filled the air. The elders turned back to Nia. You have committed a great crime, Elder Django said. You stole a child, you abused her, and when the truth threatened to surface, you tried to destroy her. Nia's hands trembled. I did what was necessary. What was necessary, Elder Django said coldly, was justice. And justice will be served. A shudder rippled through the villagers as the elders murmured among themselves. The punishment for such betrayal would be severe. Finally, Elder Django spoke. You will be exiled from this village, Nia. Never again will you be allowed to set foot in Nayabira. Nia's face paled. No, you can't. We can, another elder said. You have betrayed not only Zuri but all of us. Your lies have tainted this village for too long. The crowd murmured in agreement. Zuri met Nia's desperate gaze and felt no sympathy. Once she might have begged for mercy. But not anymore. She stepped closer to Nia, lowering her voice so that only she could hear. You stole my life, she whispered. But you will never steal my future. Nia's eyes burned with hatred, but she said nothing. The guard stepped forward, gripping her arms. She fought, but it was useless. And just like that, Nia, the woman who had tormented her for years, was led out of the village, disappearing into the darkness. The moment she was gone, a hush fell over the crowd. Then a voice broke the silence. She has returned. Another voice followed. The lost daughter of Naima. Zuri's chest tightened. For the first time in her life, she was not a servant, not a victim, not a forgotten girl left to suffer. She was Zuri, the rightful heir. And her journey was only just beginning. The sun rose over Nayabira, casting golden light across the village. The air carried the scent of fresh earth and the distant laughter of children. For the first time in her life, Zuri felt at peace. No longer was she the girl forced to toil under the cruelty of her stepmother. No longer was she a forgotten soul, cast aside like an unwanted shadow. She had reclaimed her name, her story, and her power. And yet, the weight of her new reality settled on her shoulders. Finding her place, the villagers regarded her with newfound respect. Some were still hesitant, uncertain about how to treat the girl they had once ignored. But others welcomed her, offering warm words and gifts of food and fabric. One morning, Elder Django approached her near the riverbank, where she stood watching the water ripple in the gentle breeze. You have endured much, he said, his voice heavy with wisdom. And yet, you remain standing. Zuri turned to face him. I had no choice, she admitted. If I had given up, I would have been lost forever. Elder Django nodded. You are not just a survivor, Zuri. You are a leader. She blinked. A leader? He smiled. Our village has been without true guidance for a long time. We have followed tradition but we have forgotten wisdom. You bring both. Zuri hesitated. She had never imagined herself as anything more than a simple village girl, dreaming of freedom. But now, standing here, she saw the truth. She had changed. She was no longer just a girl. She was a force. The nobleman's offer. Days passed and life in Nayabira began to settle into a new rhythm. Zuri worked alongside the villagers, helping to rebuild what had been broken. Not just homes but spirits. She taught the younger ones how to read, shared stories of her journey, and listened to the dreams of those who had once been too afraid to speak. Then one evening Lord Otto arrived. Dressed in his noble robes, he stepped into the village square, his presence as commanding as ever. The villagers whispered among themselves, unsure of what this meant. Zuri met him with steady eyes. "I see you have found where you belong," he said, his voice measured. She nodded. "I have." Otto studied her for a long moment. "But you are destined for more." She frowned. "What do you mean?" "You bear a noble lineage, Zuri. You were never meant to live in the shadows. I offer you a place at my estate, a life of power, education, a future that extends beyond this village." Zuri's heart pounded. It was everything she had never dared to dream of. The chance to learn, to grow, to become someone greater than she had ever imagined. And yet, she turned her gaze toward the village, the people who had suffered, the children who still needed guidance, the elders who looked to her with hope. She had fought so hard to return home. Could she leave again? The choice that defined her. That night, she sat alone by the river, staring at her reflection in the water. The girl she saw was not the same girl who had once lived under Nia's cruel rule. This girl was strong, unbreakable, free. But what was freedom truly? The next morning she gave Otto her answer. "I am grateful for your offer," she said. "But my place is here." Otto studied her, his expression unreadable. Then after a long pause he nodded. "Then I will not stand in your way." He reached into his robe and pulled out a small pendant. "Take this," he said. "Should you ever need help, this will grant you passage to my estate." Zuri took it, her fingers curling around the cool metal. Otto gave her a final nod before turning to leave. "You have chosen your path, Zuri. Walk it with pride." She watched him go, knowing she had made the right choice. A new beginning. As the days turned into weeks, Zuri fully embraced her role in the village. She helped establish a school where children could learn more than just farming and tradition. She taught them about courage, about standing up for what was right, about believing in their own strength. She worked with the elders, ensuring that no child would ever suffer as she had. No one would be cast aside again. And as she stood before her people one evening, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and red, she felt something deep within her chest. Not just peace, not just relief, but purpose. Zuri had found her place. And she would protect it always, because she was not just the girl who had suffered. She was the girl who had risen. And this was only the beginning. The sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows over the village of Nayabira. Children gathered around the elders, wide-eyed as they listened to the tale that had become legend. The story of a girl who had been cast away, only to return stronger than ever. Zuri. Her name had become more than just a name. It was a symbol of resilience, of justice, of fate itself. She sat at the heart of the village, watching as life thrived around her. The people had changed since her return. The fear that once kept them silent had been replaced with strength. No child in Nayabira would ever suffer the way she had. No one would be left to the mercy of cruelty. Because she had ensured it. A village transformed. Zuri had worked tirelessly to rebuild what was broken, not just in homes and fields but in the hearts of her people. She had helped establish new traditions, ones that valued fairness over blind obedience, strength over silence. The elders, once hesitant to embrace change, had come to respect her vision. Elder Django had been the first to stand by her side, advocating for a new way forward. She had trained young girls and boys alike in the skills needed to defend themselves, not just with their hands but with their minds. They would never again bow to cruelty. And most importantly, she had ensured that every child, no matter their status, would be given an education. The school she had built flourished, filled with eager minds ready to shape a future far better than the past. The village had changed. Because of her. A visit from the nobleman. One evening, as the village prepared for the harvest festival, a familiar figure arrived. Lord Otto. He rode in on a dark horse, his presence commanding as ever. The villagers watched with hushed curiosity, unsure of what his visit meant. But Zuri knew. She met him at the village's entrance, standing tall. "You have come back." Otto dismounted, studying her with a knowing gaze. I had to see it for myself, he said. The girl who chose her own path. Zuri smiled. And do you approve? Otto chuckled. More than that. I admire it. They walked through the village together, Otto taking in the changes, the thriving fields, the strong-willed people, the school filled with eager learners. You have done what many would not dare to do, he said. You have rewritten fate. Zuri glanced at him. Or perhaps fate had already written this path for me. Otto stopped walking. For the first time, there was something different in his eyes, an emotion Zuri couldn't quite place. There is something you must know, he said quietly. Zuri's heart pounded. What is it? Otto exhaled. Your mother, Naima, was not just connected to my noble house. She was part of a greater plan, one that was never meant to be interrupted. Zuri frowned. What do you mean? Otto looked at her, his expression solemn. Your birth was no accident, Zuri. Your mother was part of an ancient lineage, protectors of balance between power and justice. But when she was betrayed, that balance was lost. Zuri felt the weight of his words settle deep in her chest. And you knew. I knew of the prophecy, Otto admitted. A child would be born with the markings of fate. A child who would restore what was broken. He looked at her wrist, where the faint glow of her markings remained. I have been searching for that child all my life. Zuri swallowed hard. And you found me. Otto nodded. But fate chose you long before I ever did. Fate's unwavering path. Zuri sat by the river that night, staring at the moon's reflection in the water. Her entire life had been shaped by forces she had never understood. She had suffered, fought, and risen, all while fate quietly guided her steps. She thought back to every moment that had brought her here. Her stepmother's cruelty. The night she had been taken away. The nobleman's strange protection. The choice she had made to return home. It had all been leading to this. She wasn't just a girl who had escaped suffering. She was the guardian of something greater. And she would ensure that fate's plan unfolded as it should. A final message. As the festival fires burned bright, Zuri stood before her people, her voice steady as she spoke. Our lives are not always our own to shape, she said. Sometimes fate carves a path for us long before we understand it. But it is not fate alone that defines us, it is our choices. The villagers listened, their eyes filled with admiration. I was meant to suffer, Zuri continued. But I chose to rise. She lifted her wrist, letting the markings shine under the firelight. And now, I choose to ensure that no one else is left at the mercy of cruelty. That no one else is forced into silence. That no one else is forgotten. She smiled, glancing at Otto, who watched her with pride. Because fate may guide us, she finished, but it is the worthy who decide how the story ends. And with that, the legend of Zuri, the girl who defied fate, was forever etched into the heart of Nayabira. Fate had found her. And she had answered its call.